I'm a big YouTuber now. I have a whole team, a hair and makeup crew. They're off there, just off camera, just in the background. Trust me. So today we're talking about the hierarchy of gains. Get it right and grow. Get it wrong and no. Now, some people have said that tier lists or hierarchies are oversimplifications. I think they are, at times, necessary simplifications, and they're a good framework to work with. Whether you're a lobster or a mobster, hierarchies matter.
So unfortunate, so unnecessary.
So we're going to talk about the 5 hierarchies in order from most important to least important. Not going to, leave you hanging or anything. Not like I need the watch time. We're going to talk about the practical considerations as well as the interactions between the tiers. Now, hierarchy number 1, the most important thing is technique. This comes before everything. Never sacrifice technique for the other things. This has to come first. It has to, no other way around this. Now, some people might say, oh, Geoff, but you use cheat reps. Cheat reps are not necessarily bad technique. They might be, but not necessarily. But when you see someone like Ronnie Coleman or Arnold Schwarzenegger train, they might use a somewhat looser, sloppier technique, but it's still under control and they're still getting a lot from the set. If anything, they're getting more from that set because it actually smooths out the difficulty of each rep. So because you're stronger in the eccentric, cheating a little bit on the concentric, and then controlling that heavier weight that you can use because you're cheating on that eccentric is actually very, very productive. Whereas a beginner cheating, they're just moving around, they're just moving the weight, they're not really getting more out of that compared to strict form. More often than not, they just enjoy moving non-baby weights. But if you have a baby physique, you might need to be moving baby weights because that's just where you're at. So stuff like control, tempo, focus, precision. If you look at the technique of a really, really high-level advanced bodybuilder, they are precise. They might be cheating, but they're still going to be looking the same every single rep, and you can tell that they are in complete control of how they are moving. Consistency, repeatability. Every week should look roughly the same. If you're cheating, it should not look completely different week 1 than week 4. If you're getting progressively more cheaty, that is probably not a great way to progress. And technique is the bedrock upon which everything else is built. There's no other way around it. It's unavoidable, it's inescapable, it's inevitable. You have to have good technique. That'll look a little bit different for every single person, but it's like pornography. You know it when you see it. Now, tier 2 is going to be progression. You have to have good technique first, then you follow that up with progression. If you're not adding weight to the bar or to the dumbbell or to the machine or to the cable or whatever, over time, you're probably not going to be doing that much. Any fitness influencer who downplays progressive overload, that is an instant giveaway that they are a complete fucking charlatan. And it would absolutely be nice to be able to go into the gym and do whatever you connected with that day for whatever weight and however many reps, and you felt the biceps and the biceps responded, and then you both waltzed off into the sunset and got married. That's not how things work. So you need to have some kind of system of progression. I go into this in my latest book. This could be as simple as adding 5 pounds each week. That probably won't work forever. In fact, it definitely won't work forever. But you need to have some kind of way to progressively overload over time. This comes after technique. You should not be letting your technique break down, but it is still very important. Next up, effort. Again, you know it when you see it. If someone, they're grunting and groaning and then they just finish the set and walk off, probably wasn't actually a great effort. A lot of social media, bring it in here, bring it in here. It's fucking fake. It's fucking fake. Completely fake. You see these people like, they're grunting and they're straining and all the neck veins and stuff. It's not actually a hard set. It's just done for social media. They're using baby weights and they're acting. They're actors. But actual effort, actually just caring about a set is super, super important. And again, you can see this. You can see the people who are just going through the motions and those who are actually pulling on that bar for everything they're worth. Number 4, and this is a little bit difficult to explain, is proximity to failure. So this has a little bit of overlap with tier number 3, effort. Typically, closer to failure is higher effort, but not always. There are people who are getting far more out of an RPE 8 set than some other people who are doing an RPE 10 set. There are some people who are training to failure, but it's not actually all that high of an effort. And so you'll see some people, they'll do a set and, it'll be going well, be going smoothly. I'm like, all right, they're getting into the set, and then they'll just stop. They'll just be done. And was it maybe technical failure? Maybe they missed a tiny part of the range of motion. Maybe they felt like, they were a little bit out of position, or, oh my God, it hurts. There's a little bit of a burning sensation. My local intramuscular pH balance has been slightly disrupted. Therefore, I should stop the set. So, was it maybe failure in some kind of justification? Sure, I guess. But the effort still wasn't very high. So, always prioritize effort over proximity to failure. And keep in mind that last rep that you fail, that's not actually what is driving any kind of adaptations. Okay, it's doing something, but that's not the rep. Okay, and that rep before failure, that's not anything super, super special. And anyone who claims that is doing something magical or something that another set couldn't do or something that more reps couldn't do is probably trying to sell you something. Tier number 5, volume. So this absolutely comes below everything else on this list. I see a lot of people, they're doing too much volume and they're focusing on quantity before quality. Quality should always come first. Now, what determines a quality set? Well, everything else that came before this on the list. And I've seen many, many beginners who are up over 20 sets per muscle group per week, over 30 sets per week, okay? And that's where you really do have to think, is this something you actually need, or are you focusing on this variable to the detriment of the other variables? Okay, the other ones have to come first. Your proximity to failure, your effort, your focus, your technique, progression. Conversely, I've seen many, many very successful natural lifters, far bigger than me, who are at under that 10 sets per muscle group per week. That 10 to 20 range is the evidence-based recommendation. I know people under that who are fucking huge. They're at 8 sets per muscle group per week, or 6 sets per muscle group per week. How is that possible? Well, they're nailing everything else on this list. Technique, flawless, pristine. Progression, they're adding weight to the bar. That is going to be more important than your volume, for sure, in a lot of cases. Their effort, their proximity to failure, they're putting in these quality sets and getting a lot out of them, and so they just don't have to do that much. But you don't start with volume. You don't say, I'm going to do 20 sets for chest every week, and then now you're focusing on proximity to failure. Now you're focusing on technique. No, those other things have to come first, and then you use volume as a way to titrate up or down your training stress. By the way, if you want to help me fuel my caffeine addiction, you can go to verityfit.com and pick up one of my books. Verityfit.com, that's our sponsor at verityfit.com. I'm currently shilling out to big gains. And most people have this tier list flipped upside down. So the volume is what they focus on first, then maybe proximity to failure. I guess effort kind of matters. Yeah, progression, I guess, I'll add weight when I feel like it. Maybe, I guess, kind of. And then, technique, it's just, the research doesn't actually show technique to matter. So, it's kind of just the volume at this point, right? So what happens if you flip this upside down? Well, what happens if you focus on progression without technique? So you're allowing your technique to get worse in terms of hypertrophy training in order to progress. Well, you might not be gaining any muscle. Okay, so you have to have the technique fixed and then you can progress. When it comes to hypertrophy training, you can almost always hack your technique, especially on the bigger lifts, in order to move more weight. You can either cheat more, you can cheat excessively, you can improve your leverages, you can arch more in the bench press, you can squat a little bit higher, you can deadlift with a little bit wider of a sumo stance, that kind of thing. You can use a whippier bar, whatever. Okay, so there's almost always ways to eke out a little bit more progression by changing your technique. Don't do that. Unless you're a powerlifter, in which case, that's kind of the sport. Now, what happens if you are progressing in effort, but not actually progressing with weight on the bar or some other form of progressive overload? That's literally just train harder than last time. That's a meme. Can you imagine? Oh, I've been using the same weight on bench press for 3 months now, but it's getting way harder. That means you're getting worse. Oh yeah, my RDLs have been feeling super challenging recently, really, really heavy, heavier than usual. Oh yeah, so how much weight have you added to the bar? Nothing. They're just feeling really shitty. Now what happens if you put effort over technique? Well, I call this branch warning your training, and it actually warrants a warning. Ooh, good job, brain. And this is going to get you injured. It's inevitable. If you put a whole bunch of effort into your training with dog shit technique, again, some cheating at some points and some occasions is okay. But generally speaking, if you're letting your technique go to absolute shit, you're going to get injured eventually, especially when you get strong. Same thing when you put proximity to failure over technique. It's not necessarily the proximity to failure that is driving adaptations, and you should never sacrifice your technique just to go closer to failure. Now, proximity to failure versus progression is an interesting one. I think some people are of the opinion that my training doesn't focus on progression, and it's just like, oh, go hard all the time. You don't need to add weight to the bar. Just train to failure, man. Not at all. If you can choose one or the other, go for progression before failure all the time. In fact, if you can progress without training anywhere near failure, that's fantastic. If you can make progress with 4 or 5 reps in reserve, that's great. Like, training hard, there's no glory in training hard. There is glory in getting fucking jacked. And if you can make progress with 2, 3, 4 reps in reserve, I mean, I sign off on that for clients all the frickin' time. People are like, should I go closer to failure? Well, we're still making progress, so it's not 100% necessary. Training to failure facilitates progression, but if you don't need to fail and you can still progress, fantastic. Now, what happens when you put proximity to failure over effort? Again, these ones are a little bit overlapping, but take this example. Let's say you fail a rep because you got out of position, right? Like you slightly mistimed it or something on an incline dumbbell curl, whereas in another alternate universe, you nailed the rep and it was still difficult. It was still a grinder. It took like 5 or 6 seconds to get it up. Which is actually going to stimulate more muscle growth? The rep where you fail, like, oh, you missed it. Or the rep where you got it through and you got a full rep, but it was very, very challenging. The effort, for sure. And what happens if you focus on volume over technique? Well, you're probably going to get overuse injuries. Okay, if you're doing 30 or 40 sets and the technique is dog shit, what's the point? Like, you're either just wasting your time or you're going to get snapped up or you're going to have, achy joints eventually. Now, what about volume and progression? To a certain extent, there's a little bit of a trade-off here. Sometimes. So this one's a complicated one because for some people, the more volume you do, the better progression is. For other people, the more volume you do, the worse progression is in terms of adding weight to the bar. Okay, so you need to find out how you respond to volume and then choose the best volume for you, which might also change over time. Still, I think for most people, especially given time constraints, you're better off focusing on progression than volume. I think a lot of the success for minimalistic training or DC training or low volume, high intensity training is from the fact that they emphasize progression. Whereas you look at a lot of high volume plans, you go to simplyshredded.com or whatever, all these fucking influencer plans, it's like 5 sets of 15 on everything with no clear way to progress. It's just do this plan, do a lot of it. It's going to be really challenging. We don't know if you're going to get stronger or not. Have fun. Now, when you put volume over effort, every set tends to just be a little bit wishy-washy, and this is super, super common. If you can only do one set, that set is going to be more challenging, and you're going to put more into that one set than if you have to do 3 sets, than if you have to do 5 sets, than if you have to do 7 sets. And so when I see these high volume studies claiming people are going to failure, maybe they are, they're probably not, but I can guarantee you that the effort is going to be in the absolute gutter when you're doing your 45th set of quads that week. And what about volume without proximity to failure? Well, now you're just doing sort of fluff and pump training. You're just going through the motions. A set is just a set so that you can write the set in the training log. It's not actually doing anything. It's just something you check off in the training book. Ultimately, who cares how many sets you're doing if they all suck? And I personally fell into this trap where I was doing huge amounts of volume, but technique very, very sloppy, not particularly precise, not really accurate, just sort of, moving some weight and not even moving a lot of weight because progression was not there. Effort, I thought it was good, but in hindsight, I actually train a lot harder now and I get a lot more out of each set. Now, I still do fairly high volumes, but I make sure that everything else is in line first. You can use this as a tool for exercise selection. So, who cares how many sets you're doing in terms of volume on a movement if you can't do it properly? Who cares how many sets you're doing if you can't actually progress and get stronger over time? Effort, proximity to failure. Geoff Nippert says that the bench press is his best chest exercise. Well, it's because he really likes it and he puts a lot of effort into it, which actually makes it more optimal than these so-called biomechanically optimal movements. So you have to also consider, what are you going to put effort into, what allows for good progression, and then can you do it with great technique. Now, if someone is really into, isolation movements, they really like to do a press around or an iliac pull down or something like that, and they're going to put effort into that, fuck yeah, load it up, progress that. If they have good technique, everything is pristine, a lot of movements can work. And so make sure you have this ticked off in order. And it has to be in this exact order, at least in my opinion. And I am known for higher volumes, but more often than not, when I'm actually coaching someone, I send them back their training plan, and they're like, is this it? Like, where's the rest of it? Like, I thought there would be more. Well, let's check the other factors first. Let's see how your technique is. If we can improve that alone might be actually better for your gains. Let's see how your progression is. Can you add weight to the bar with a more modest amount of volume? Let's see how your effort is. Let's see how your proximity to failure is. Get all those in order first, and then maybe you can scale the volume up if you feel good and you plateau. But don't start off with super high volumes when everything else is not in line. Also, I apologize for that Jordan Peterson joke in the beginning. Not my best work. I've been under a little bit of pressure at work lately. But if you are interested in my best work, definitely check out a copy of my not award-winning books, but they've been very well received. And that will help you a ton in your fitness journey. It could, without any exaggeration, save you years of struggling. Thank you so much for the support, and thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Peace.